Welcome to another episode of Media Watch. I'm your host, Dr. Savvy. And this week, as per normal, we have some fantastic guests. I won't steal their glory and tell you all about them. I'll just mention their names. They've been on the show before. Firstly, we've got Puneet Grewal, and first time ever, I'm not going to embarrass them, well, I might do a little bit, brother and sister, we've also got Vickram Grewal as well. Welcome to the show. Tell us all about what you've been doing since the last time we saw you.
Busy with the council and with work. It's trial after trial, so yep, keeping busy.
They can't confuse the two by being a councillor for Hounslow and being on trial.
No, I don't confuse the two. It does, sometimes it gets a bit taxing, but I definitely try to keep them quite separate.
Brilliant, okay, so it'd be difficult to come to a meeting and have both notes at the same time and
Most
get them
certainly.
confused. You know.
Yeah.
Brilliant, good. Thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thank
really
you for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
And Vickram, good to see you again. You wrote a paper recently for the Fabian Group. You're a lead of the young Fabians at the moment,
yes,
as well as your financial analyst at work.
Yeah, so I work in asset management. I'm also chair of the Fabian Finance Network. I've been very active this year, and since I saw you last, I held an event with a leading academic in the country about tax havens when the Mossack Fonseca leak came in the Panama Papers. That was fantastic. And recently I held one about blockchain, Bitcoin, and the future of financial regulation.
I read about blockchain recently, actually. It's supposed to be the biggest thing that's going to affect the hedge funds. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. So I had a Magic Circle lawyer come in about blockchains. He's a specialist in fintech, a CEO of a Bitcoin firm, and the leading academic in financial regulation. She's also the chief scholar at King's University about financial regulation, how we'll intertwine them all, because that will be the future of finance.
That's what they say, isn't it? It's going to revolutionize the way in which people trade.
Exactly. And then I'm kind of taking them together and building the future of the Labour Party and economic policy on the 15th of June in Parliament, having one of John McDonnell's economic advisors there, and the CEO of another think tank about the future of banking and how we can make it more socially acceptable and more beneficial for society and not just the bankers and their pay packets.
Okay, because that is still got bad press, isn't it?
It is. And we, as a party, I think Labour needs to become more pro-business and have more pragmatic solutions. So hopefully we'll present some of them in Parliament on that day.
Fantastic. So we're going to talk about a couple of stories. The first one we're going to cover is the one about the recent statistics about the increasing number of deaths in the Mediterranean. The second topic we're going to look at is the continuing debate. I think 23rd of June is the question that the nation and the United Kingdom are going to have about stay or leave the EU. And we'll be looking at immigration, and we'll also be looking at some other aspects of it too, just to kind of widen the debate. I think they're both related in terms of the immigration element, and there is a particular poster I think we'd like to discuss in a bit. But without fail, let's continue with this sad news that in the summer in the Mediterranean we normally find we get an influx of US and European vacationers, but in the last few years the warm weather has also seen a huge surge in people trying to cross over, and I think in the last week, more than 1,000 refugees from Africa have died trying to get to Italy, and it's the highest death toll since 2014. Scenes of desperation in the heart of the Mediterranean over the past week. We've seen rescuers, they've scrambled in dozens of boats, which are large and small vessels, overflowing with migrants. And a survivor from Eritrea said, he chose not to give his name, said he never imagined the danger. And that was my kind of point I really wanted to talk about. I mean, sadly there's another picture of a child that died, very young child, very disturbing picture. But so do you think that people realise how hard it is to cross over that, especially from Africa? I mean, I've been to Tunisia and I've been to Morocco and I've been to some of the the places that are more kind of the north part of Africa, including Egypt. It's quite a gap, and very rough as well. Why do you think it's a perception thing that it's just load up in a boat and get over and you'll be okay?
I think it's, you've said really the key word, desperation. And I think desperation overtakes anything else in the mindsets of these people that are willing to take the risk. They obviously believe that they're able to get across. They've seen people are getting across. And that really, desperation takes them as far as they need to go. They're not thinking, what if we don't get across? What's going to happen to us? They want to leave there and then. They want to get across, and they hope they will.
And they come not necessarily from the top half of Africa. I think they do come from the centre as well and further south. I saw a documentary just about a year ago, and the people that actually organise, the people the traffickers, yeah, right? they can't get them. And why do you think that is? Do you think there's not enough money in it, or do you not interest in people to go and try and get them and shut that down?
I think to follow on from my sister's point, you always have to assume and take the benefit of doubt element, and also think that people are risking their lives. Children are drowning in the sea, and they're obviously running away from some sort of tyranny, some sort of regime that is suppressing them. Otherwise, they wouldn't take those kind of risks. There will always be a proportion of economic migrants, but I feel that we should always see them as migrants and running and being refugees. And I think it's our duty, not just as Britain, but as a continent, to take care of them. And they'll be useful in our economies in the future. But if you look from a global point of view, or from the globe, the actual distance from the country that these people are traveling from into Europe, it kind of crosses the sea at one point, and then it's from Africa into Europe. And that's where the policing on the seas is not as great as it should be, because there's not investment in there. And countries like Greece that are stretched economically right now, and they're under a lot of pressure to meet their austerity measures. And also Turkey are wanting to reject these people at the same time, and police strongly, but at the same time they want to be in the EU, so they don't want to seem like they're too strong. I mean, there's scenes of their politicians fighting in Parliament that we can never imagine here, even though PMQs gets quite heated. But a mixture of that and just hesitancy to step in and do what's needed to push these traffickers back and say we will not allow anyone else in, and their travellers are wasting their money essentially. I think that may come over time.
I know we've spoken about this. It's not even quite legal in terms of the human rights issue about exchanging refugees from Turkey and Greece, right? And then putting one back across, and then whatever that whole deal was, and also the amount of money that was given to Turkey, and the fact that we don't know whether or not they'll. And we'll come back to this whole issue about the EU and possible Turkey joining. I just want to touch on one point that you made about policing that particular area. Should we not be policing the actual traffickers? Because I know there's desperation, and effectively we've got two things. We're trying to fix a problem that we don't have control over politically, but there's also the traffickers that are making money out of it, and also putting these people through hell as they go from one town to another to get to the coast, to get onto those dodgy boats. I mean, where is the focus in the wrong place?
I think so. I just think that we should attack the traffickers more so than the people, and prosecute the people. Instead of prosecuting the people that are actually on those boats, attack the traffickers that are breaking law, that are taking these people's money. And quite frankly, they're the ones that are carrying them and putting them through those risks. Imprison them, make examples of them in that way, through legal channels, and make it very public in the public domain, so that the people will hesitate when they think, should we take that risk of going with this trafficker? Will he ultimately bring the optimal outcome for us, which is for us to go into Europe? And once there's that seed of doubt in their minds, they will not part from the huge sums of money that they're sadly paying to take that risk and lose their life.
There's two arguments to this, right? You could address the money bit, right? Because it costs money to do this, right? So we'll come back to you in a second. The legal aspect, right? Isn't there an international law? Aren't these people all members of the United Nations? Shouldn't the United Nations be saying, well, you shouldn't be doing that?
It's, Savvy, it's very difficult to prosecute traffickers or to find out who the traffickers are.
Yeah, well, what about the government themselves? What about those people that are in power that are saying we won't allow this in our countries? Because they're all sitting on the same council over in New York or wherever they are. I
mean, they can say they won't allow it. A lot of laws are broken. People go against what is allowed and what isn't allowed. The root of the problem is the traffickers, as you said, but it's getting to those traffickers. Often these people that are coming across will be very reluctant to ever say that they are being trafficked. They have been aided to come across. They've come by their own means because of the fear they have placed in them before they leave. So it's...
Well, they don't even show their faces, I think, so they can't be tracked down.
No.
From a money perspective, shouldn't those countries get together? They've got this United Nations fund or something. They put a whole lot of cash in, and they can say, well, we've got all this money now. We'll setting the United Nations troops in to try and sort this out, set up a camp. What's happened to the creativity with using that cash in the right way? And actually getting all the governments to work with each other, all the ones that are on that trail. There must be some kind of, trail that they use, or different routes they use to get to the coast.
Yeah, and ultimately these big institutions like the UN have failed because they're not policing these seas correctly, which are leaving all these innocent people and sometimes young children that we've seen tragic scenes of that in the hands of these traffickers. I think I saw one situation in one of the Greek islands where the Greek naval authorities had to actually rescue the boat because it was going to go down.
That's happened a lot this week.
And the Greek people started asking them who was the trafficker, who was the person, and they all pointed at that person, and then they got prosecuted. But that's one isolated incident. That needs to become a regular occurrence, and they need to be stopped at source, not just whilst they're at the sea, but before they even board those boats. And that's the only way to stop this.
Yeah, so really good points. Thank you for that. Let's continue to the next part. We wanted to talk about the EU question, lumbering over everyone's head. Now, a couple of points. First of all, about the trade unions. We have a conflicting statement being made. A pro-Remain organisation has said that if we leave the EU, it's a threat to manufacturing jobs. The TU General Secretary Francis O'Grady said that trade investment could be affected by the EU exit. But another trade union chief, this is the RM team's Mick Cash, that's the Railway Maintenance Union, I think it is, said that the EU had pursued a race to the bottom on workers' rights and could never be reformed. So this is somebody with the union saying the workers' rights are not quite there. So really, do we see that that's an issue? There's a publication of the TUC research has said that in an effort to recruit traditional Labour voters and the rivals in terms of the ahead of the 23rd of June referendum, it said that the manufacturing sector will be hit 7 times harder than those in the service sector because it exports so much to the EU. 2 conflicting statements, one about export and jobs, one about rights. What do you think about that in terms of from a again, we come back to a legal perspective.
Well,
right?
in terms of
human rights,
in terms
workers'
of
rights.
in terms of the rights, equal pay, non-discrimination, EU law is enshrined with those beliefs. So, from the outset, I am very much to stay in the EU. And with your other question was the workers' rights.
You've got the workers' right, and you've got the fact that you've got this issue around exports to the EU.
Yeah.
You make money on that. Because we'll talk about the 18 point whatever billion it is.
I think I think it's been stated. I think 3.
You get that refund. Did you get that back?
Well, I think 3.2 million British jobs will be affected if we leave. That's 1 in every 10 British job. It's a no-brainer, really, this argument, and it's quite confusing. I think it's confusing from a union perspective, from either unions, that they are giving this in-out view, because you would expect that unions would have a similar sort of view.
And would that generate more jobs, do you think, staying in the EU?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on imports and exports. You have to look at the facts here, because there's a lot of noise, and there will be more noise until the 23rd of June. Imports and exports, I can give you just a stat from the top of my head, is that the UK earns 15% of its GDP through exports to the EU. All the EU states, they only earn 3% from the exports, 5%, not 3%, from the exports that they send to the UK. So clearly there's an economic argument, and that transpires into, we have a current account deficit with the EU, meaning that we're importing a lot more than what we're exporting. So that all transpires into jobs. And the manufacturing sector, the Centre of Economic Research and Business Research, who are an independent think tank, they said by 2030, 110,000 jobs will be at risk if we leave on the 23rd.
What about the statement that has been made about the fact that there's a lot of disputes in France? I mean, there was a fuel thing last week, wasn't there? But there's lots of disputes, workers' disputes. Is that some kind of argument that's saying that there's more in mainland Europe than there is in the UK because the trade union laws are slightly different?
I think when you look at trade unions, their inception and what they stand for is for workers' rights, and we know for a fact that minus the living wage, minus small increments like that into the working environment, most of our workers' rights that we all take benefits from on a day-to-day basis is because we're a part of the EU. And one that's quite particular to my industry is capping bankers' bonuses. Osborne went there on the day that he announced bedroom taxes on the most poorest and needy in society, went to Brussels to fight for that cap not to be there, but the EU enshrined it in their law that the bankers' bonuses it cannot surpass their actual salary. And the only way it can is if their shareholders agree to that. And if we look at banks like RBS, for example, that was the biggest bank before the crash, then they became 78% owned by the state. Do you think their bankers deserve bonuses more than their base salary? I don't think so. I'd rather give that to a lot of the doctors and teachers out there that are having pay freezes instead of bankers receiving them. And that's just one example. There's paternity leave, there's working hours, there's so many, from an employment law perspective, I know my sister can touch on it more, for staying in the EU than leaving. So I don't understand why.
Because sometimes £38 or whatever it is, the differentials, you know, the money and stuff that people get. I mean, £38 is probably, you think, oh, that's £38. You know, you might go for a meal or whatever. For some people, for some other people, it may be the difference between getting heating or gas
eating.
or, you know, or getting something to eat by the end of the week. You know, we don't realise how difficult it is for certain people in this country.
I mean, if you look at Ed Miliband, the former leader of the Labour Party that's now quite involved in the campaign, his election standpoint was about food banks, and we've seen there's been an exponential increase in the need for food banks. I personally help out a lot of soup kitchens in my spare time as well, and you just see the dependency levels that you do not see in the media. And the fact is, we all live quite comfortable lives, and we're very blessed for that, but there are so many people out there that have a choice between eating or heating, and £38 a week is pivotal, not just for them, but for their kids, for their elderly, you know, members of their house, and that's what we really have to think about.
Absolutely. Let's move on to, we're going to put a picture up in a second about the, this is related to the point we were making before about immigration. One Black Vote, right, let's put the picture up right now, made this particular picture, which at first view may look something like there's a racist on one end, which is depicting a stereotype of a skinhead. I know a skinhead, but he's not a racist, but he's quite a nice chap actually. But then on the other side, you've got a person in the sari. Is that supposed to be a depiction of an immigrant or something? I don't know. And then on a seesaw. So the seesaw is supposed to imply, you know, you need to get your act together in terms of coming out to vote. Is it racist? That's been one of the points. What do you think when you see that? Do you think it's like, vote for us, otherwise you're going to let the racists in?
I think the image in some senses does depict racism, and the way in which they have a typical looking, could be racist person on one side and a very Indian looking lady on another side. But also,
I was thinking actually, sorry to interrupt you, when I first saw it, I thought the person on the left-hand side, or you know, the person in the sari, has probably been in there in more years in the UK than the young lad, because it used to be my dad, who lived on his street, had lived more years on that street since 1960 than all his local neighbours that had moved in. Sorry.
And arguably worked probably a lot longer than the other person.
And paid more into the system.
More, yeah, precisely. But I think what it is saying, and I hope it's saying, and I think what we should try and get from that image is that everybody needs to go out and vote on the 23rd. It's so important. Everybody's votes will count. And in a way, it's saying that it is your vote. A vote is a vote. Go out and vote.
But is it racist?
Saying a vote is a vote isn't racist. I think the image itself could be perceived to be racist.
Because of the stereotype, or?
Because of the stereotype, the way in which the gentleman is pointing at the woman.
In an aggressive kind of.
Yeah, and it's with an aggressive sort of, look.
Yeah.
So I think.
Where's my dinner? Maybe, you know.
Where's my curry?
Yeah, where's my curry?
I mean,
get that to the curry house and make some. You know.
Just to carry on from my sister's point here, it's not a racist image; it's a provocative one, and you have to look at Operation Black Vote do some absolutely fantastic work, and you have to think about where they've got to in terms of that picture.
Didn't they actually encourage more magistrates as well? They had that.
They did.
Thing as
yeah,
well,
they did.
Yeah.
And I mean, and to touch on my article that I wrote for the Fabian Society in December about ethnic minorities and in politics and in the UK generally, not so long ago we had senior politicians in this country like Enoch Powell and his Rivers of Blood speech, where we had racism directly towards Commonwealth migrants, and now we're having it towards the EU migrants, whether we swap Enoch Powell with, let's say, Nigel Farage, Marine Le Pen in France, or some of the right-wing insurgencies in Eastern Europe or Germany. So we have to think, we're very sheltered now. We think that we're on an equal playing field, but there's been so much that a lot of political parties, like the Labour Party with the Race Equality Act in 2010, and even some of the New Labour stuff before that, to bring us to this point. And that's what that seesaw is saying, that every vote matters. And the reason why the seesaw is not like this or this, it's on an even playing field, is because despite your colour, crease, whatever you are, you have an equal vote in this country, and that echoes a lot of what Sikhism's about. Because we essentially incepted because Guru Nanak Dev Ji rejected the caste system because he said everyone's equal.
And said men and women are the same.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm not saying that there's a heavy Sikh influence on that photo, but I'm saying there's a lot of synergies that we can make towards that, and it's provocative. But hopefully, it wakes up a lot of our ethnic minority voters out there and tell them register to vote and go and vote on the 23rd of June, because every vote will matter. 4 out of 5 polls that came out this week have shown that the Leave side is increasing its, it's the gap between Remain and Leave, it's shutting. And they're having the insurgency in the last minute, so we need to get our votes out.
Do you think it's like equal pegging in terms of whether you were an immigrant and you're more likely to vote to stay in? And if you actually were born in the country, which you could mean you were from immigrant parents anyway, what do you think there's a change in attitude? Do you think people are more, well, it's my country, therefore I need to protect it and all the rest of it, from the so-called threat of more? Because I saw a headline somewhere that said that in the next 5 years the UK population would increase by 5 million. Right, and then there's all this talk about strain on resources and stuff. That seems to be the immigration argument this week, actually. What's your view on that? Do you think that's scaremongering?
I think it most certainly is, and I think the argument is focusing in some way too much on the insurgence of migrants, immigration, flux, and so forth. I think what we have to think about, and the importance of this EU debate is, to me anyway, from a legal and a criminal background, is that by staying in the EU, we are fighting crime, and that's got to be important to everyone, whatever race you are, whatever you believe in. Extradition laws and the procedure were all followed up, and the process has become a lot more speedy by the introduction of European arrest warrants. We're able to get justice for criminals that are here, by bringing them back from the EU easily, readily.
Radio 4 had an advert this week for the Leave campaign.
Yeah.
And the whole of that campaign for about 4 minutes, whatever it is, because they get equal pitching, was on that. Was talking more about if you vote, to leave, then it's easier for you to, kick those people out that are crossing borders and doing violence against the population. So that bit of information that you just said,
yeah,
which is the fact that it's easier for extradition, nobody knows that.
No, and it's so, I do extradition cases. I quite often go to Westminster to the court and represent often EU citizens who are wanted to go back to their countries. But the process is made a lot quicker because we have this with the EU. We have a process, we have the extradition warrant. Without this European arrest warrant and leaving the EU, it's going to make the process so much more difficult. We will have, and we may very well have for a very long time, criminals who are wanted in the EU for crimes that have been committed remaining in the UK because there is no way of sending them back. So it's the kind
of a counter effect rather than what they're saying. Now, we touched on Turkey earlier on. So again, more scaremongering. Oh, you don't want Turkey people coming in, do you? Isn't that racist?
Effectively it is. I mean, I know you had a guest a couple of weeks ago that was very, he was a Brexiteer, he was very, I would...
We try to keep it balanced.
Yeah, I completely respect that. There are two sides and both sides have valid arguments, but I'd ask the outside, the Brexiteers, to just name one empirical study that shows that migrants take more out of the system than what they put in. The fact of the matter is, and we're all kids of migrants here, all our families work hard. I don't think anyone leaves their country and comes to the UK to not better themselves and make a better life for their kids.
And sacrifices as well.
That. Yeah. And I've asked UKIP members, I've even asked senior UKIP politicians to just name one paper where it shows that migrants are taking more out of the system than not. The argument is...
Then there are people that are actually taking a mickey though, don't forget.
There are a couple, but it's always a few that spoil it for the many. But I think the argument comes down to infrastructure. There's a lack of schools, there's a lack of hospitals, there's a lack of social housing. That's not due to the migrants, that's due to poor planning by previous governments over the last 20, 30 years. Because
there's not enough houses in the UK because there hasn't been investment in that area, not because there isn't.
Exactly, it's underinvestment, and I think that's where we really need to look at. But there will be a lot of scaremongering. I mean, if you look at their out campaign, Boris's big bus that he has a big sign on there saying 350 million going to the EU.
As long as it's not a plaque, we'll be all right.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, we have actually come to the end of the show. It kind of flew by. So great to have you on. Really appreciate it. First time, both brother and sister on. Please do come back. I hope that doesn't deter you from, not coming back on the show again. Good luck with your continuing successes in your respective careers. Really appreciate your time, opinion, and great respect for that. Thank you so much. So that's it, I'm afraid, for this time round. I hope you enjoyed the show. We look forward to seeing you next time. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.